Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our banter, where we talked about the story Cicada narrated for the week, what parts we liked, and what parts we did not like about it. Today's animal fun fact is horses have a bone called the coffin bone. If you strike it, it doesn't kill them, but it does injure them severely. And if it isn't healed correctly, you do have to put them down. It makes them completely lame, which in horse terms is basically sprained.
That is a that's a crazy fact there, Cal. Definitely could have used a coffin bone for Andromeda here. That horse was a menace, as all things are considered.
Oh, definitely. Especially the way that Andromeda was sitting, she would have struck a coffin bone. No way she's holding a human head in between her back legs.
I think you are misinterpreting that a little bit. So it's sitting, Andromeda's sitting with their legs out. Their back legs are out, and their front legs are holding Aunt Betty's head as she's eating Aunt Betty.
Okay. Yeah, no, I definitely misinterpret that. I was figuring back legs were like almost crisscross applesauce holding Aunt Betty's head. And two front legs were on the ground while she was just munching on the brain.
No,
Besides the point, I think we should start from the beginning before we get into the end.
absolutely. And I guess I can leave with this. Um, I guess I'd like to start with the fact that I truly didn't enjoy the story. None of it made sense to me. It was all kind of filler just to fill in a horse, I guess. But to start, my main glaring issue is I understand that she was cheap and they wanted her, but why? Why? After Andromeda shows up and it's nothing but problems, the other horses don't like her. She bites Leah. Why do we keep Andromeda?
I think, as someone who owned horses, I had horses before, like maybe two or three, and then I brought in a third one. Horses are pack animals. They need to get used to new members before they accept them. I had to keep my new horses separate, and they smelled each other over the fence. In this story, they're all in the same pasture. Doesn't really make sense. Bad horse owners, in my opinion. They spent the money on the horse. Of course, they're gonna keep it.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, I also owned horses, but to the fault, we had a horse. We genuinely called her stupid. Her name was stupid because she would run holes through the fence. She was a bad horse. And we got rid of her. So I just, you know, after the issues, the horses don't like her because it's 5 days in at that rate before everything actually goes down. You'd think in 5 days that you wouldn't want to keep this horse anymore because it's just not bonding with the other horses that you have.
I'm gonna agree to disagree with you there. I had to keep my horse Dare separated for 3 months. Um, I always viewed that as the proper time. They need at least a year of smelling each other before they interact. Horses have a lot of vulnerabilities, I guess. There's a coffin bone. If they break their leg, they don't heal correctly. You have to put them down. There's a lot of complications. Colic. If you rush this way too fast, similar to how Aunt Betty did. I mean, the fact that Andromeda is with other horses blows my mind. But in reality, I hope they would be in different paddocks. They would be able to smell each other. That way no colic happens. They're able to have their own space. and then you slowly integrate them into the herd. It sounded like they had about 5 or 6 horses. I know there was an exact number, but they kept their space, and that is just classic horse. The one thing this story got right is that horses will not accept new members in 5 days.
That makes sense. I guess I didn't realize that. You know, I have horses, but my horses always knew each other. They've been raised together forever. So I didn't I guess I did not really realize that. But more towards the story, Aunt Betty herself, why I understand that it's a plot point, but why does grandma just keep funding this woman for this, this farm, this ranch for these horses? Because horses, I don't know, in your experience, horses don't make a lot of money. So why does grandma keep funding this?
I don't know if I would say horses don't make a lot of money. I used to be a farrier. I put horseshoes on horses. They were my living for about 2 or 3 years. There's a lot of money in horses. Aunt Betty went to college, didn't do anything with her degree. I don't know why grandma's funding money into this ranch. Seems like Ed and Betty aren't doing too much of anything, but then they are taking care of the animals. They are kind of well aware that they need to be brought in and brought out every day. I feel like the author really dogged on them, called Aunt Betty the least successful child of the bunch, but she isn't doing anything really wrong than buying horse. I don't know if she's unemployed. I know they mentioned she was unemployed once upon a time, but they kind of made it seem like it was in the past.
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna fight you really hard here, especially on your farrier point, because Cal, I'm aware that you were a farrier at one point. You made your money off horses, but that specifically, you're making your money off the people that own the horses. These are people that own horses. As someone that, owned horses in their life and was not a farrier or a vet or, a barrel racer, the horses did nothing but stand there all day. We planted alfalfa every year just to help lower the costs of these horses. So I would assume that the costs on these horses is got to be insane because you do need someone like you to come out and ferry these horses and things like that. Um and I don't know why, grandma would be funding Aunt Betty and Uncle Ed to run this operation because clearly it's not making any money. Obviously she has her degree, but Ed dropped out of high school. You know what I'm saying?
I definitely understand what you're saying. Ed seems like a deadbeat. I would say Betty seems like a deadbeat as well. They never really get into how they make their money. It seems like grandma provides it all, and the only reason she does is because Betty's the favorite for some reason. Even though the protagonist mother is definitely doing way better for herself. She has a kid. I feel like, if I ever have kids, like let's say I have two, one of them is doing nothing with their life and the other one has a child and actually progressing towards that child's benefit. I would want to help make sure my grandkid has a great life. I as a parent would hope I would give my children as many opportunities as I can, but at the end of the day, I'm a grandparent. Of course I'm going to look after my grandkids.
Yeah, I would agree with you. My grandmother, she looked after both my mother and her brother. So I would agree with you there. It's just grandma's looking out for her siblings, or not her siblings, her children, and that to me makes sense. So I would agree with you there. Um, I guess moving on from, the point of grandma supporting Aunt Betty as it's pointless, Andromeda herself, what, like, do you think that Andromeda is just a horse with something going wrong, or do you think there's more to Andromeda than just a horse that's weird?
I Andromeda as a horse. I a little bit of my horse. I owned a horse. His name was Dare. He killed and ate turkeys. He hated turkeys. That was the first time I've ever seen a horse stamp out a turkey before. It it was shocking. When Andromeda killed a rabbit, I kind of viewed that as not normal, but like not out of the realm of reality. Horses are weird. They're really smart and they do really dumb things. Andromeda, especially with that, you know, crisscross applesauce moment, I don't I don't know if they were a horse or like something trying to mimic a horse. It up until the point of killing Aunt Betty, it was a normal horse. And then out of the blue, it turned into a monster. I didn't think it made any sense.
I would agree with you. You said that your horse Dare hated turkeys. I had a horse that her name was Whitney. She hated skunks, and I have seen Whitney pick a skunk up by its tail and throw it while getting sprayed. So I absolutely, the killing of smaller animals. They would ward off coyotes, things like that. They would even fight deer, so even larger animals. My horses were aggressive, so I totally understand that, and I agree that Andromeda, up to the point, was behaving as a normal horse, except for the being on the porch part. That was a bit odd. Um, and you know, I don't understand why she was on the porch. That didn't make any sense to me. The part had nothing to do with anything. But that's neither here nor there. But I would agree that this horse is just doing normal horse things. Chasing a rabbit, and a horse being a horse, not understanding its own strength, pushes its front hooves down on this thing that it's chasing, and it kills it.
I know you said neither here nor there. That whole standing on the porch scene and then our protagonist checking the stall and seeing it's locked. I don't get it. I don't get the point. I mean, the horse isn't it's not supernatural. It's not like, ooh, I saw a ghost horse. The horse is clearly the big bad in this story. Is the author implying that the horse is intelligent enough to paddock? Throughout the story, they called the stall the horse was in a stable, which, at least to me, a stable's a building, right? You stick a horse in a stable, you stick many horses in a stable. Where a horse individually lives is a stall. The horse is intelligent enough to unlock its stall, let itself out on the porch, do stare at the protagonist, and then go back into its stall and lock it before the morning. It just doesn't make any sense. Like, this horse either is super intelligent or the protagonist is imagining things.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I said neither here nor there, because I tried to avoid this general concept. I hadn't quite wanted to get into how much I disliked the author's writing, because you're right. I mean, why is the horse suddenly on the porch? That doesn't make any sense. How does it appear there but still everything is locked and everything is still shut. How does it move from here to there? And, even I guess since we're going to get into it, how much we disliked this author's writing. It explains with the rabbit that the horse was chasing it and then it runs back into the shadows where he can't see it, but then explains that he watches the horse crush this rabbit. That to me doesn't make any sense.
I think I think we both have the same opinion on the story of we both didn't like it. If you take it at face value, it's an okay story. I I think there's a lot of plot holes, especially with I'm going to be calling way back in the story. So, our narrator is 18, an adult. Their parents don't trust them to be alone, but they're okay with our narrator hopping on a plane by themselves and making it to their grandma's house without any assistance. So they're babying them, not letting them stay in a familiar environment, but perfectly okay with sending them into something they haven't done before and figuring it out from there. Kind of similar to the horse being in the shadows, but our narrator having a perfect image of this rabbit whose guts and all the innards coming from its mouth. It just doesn't make sense. I like the details the author put in. I feel like they needed to not make it more realistic, but if you're going to include these details, you have to kind of make it so the narrator is able to witness these things.
Yeah, absolutely, Cow. There's just a ton of plot holes and things that don't make sense. Before our recording, we both agreed that there were grammatical errors as well in the story with, putting our um the bags in the back. I changed the wording when I recorded to make it flow, but the original statement there was putting my backs in the bag. Our author here, 69 6 whatever. I do apologize. I don't remember the author's name at this moment.
The
Um,
author's name is 69 6, I
six.
believe. There
Yes.
is no, on the story, there is no author listed. This was me just kind of doing some research on the story, and 69 6 was the first person to post about it. So I'm assuming they're the author.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that, and I appreciate you doing the research there. But as I was saying, there's these grammatical errors, these plot holes, and things like that, and we could obviously rag about it probably all night long. There are glaring issues with this story, but unfortunately, the otherworldly things call to me, and I do have things to attend to. So, Cal, I would like to get on with our ratings of this story, if you wouldn't mind.
I would actually like to give the story a compliment. Before we do the ratings, I do find the one scene I really enjoyed, and it just took a lot of filler to get there, was the narrator going to look for Aunt Betty because, the uncle and the cousin, they're gone for a good reason, Andromeda bit the cousin. One of the parents in the situation has to go. One of them has to stay with the narrator. Makes sense, that follows the plot line of the narrator not being trusted by themselves. I really enjoy how Aunt Betty recognizes the problem and even says the night before, Andromeda's a problem. And she goes out of her way to take the gun to try to solve the situation. And whatever demonic spirit, or evil horse, or whatever Andromeda is, overpowers Aunt Betty. I do enjoy the scene of the narrator looking for Aunt Betty, and then it kind of throws it all away of I just smiled at the horse and walked out of there and said, "Taxi cab, take me away." That kind of interesting. Like, I've got one question for you. If you are Uncle Ed, what are you doing when you come back home with your child?
You know, I I don't know. I think that I'm I got nothing because Uncle Ed has, I would assume, per chance a rifle because he says that he's shooting tin cans, and why are you shooting tin cans with a handgun? But so maybe taking your rifle and shooting Andromeda. But for the record, not to disagree wholeheartedly with your point. Um, you're telling me Aunt Betty gets a handgun out and then walks to the stall door where Andromeda is, and what, points the handgun at Andromeda, and suddenly Andromeda has these mind controlling abilities to make her not shoot her. What's going on with that?
My mental canon, and you could laugh, whatever. This is just how I made it make sense. Andromeda straight up standing on her hind legs and just smacked her hooves. It doesn't make any sense, but that's the only way. Just gave her a concussion and just knocked her out and started munching. And to be so honest, if I was Uncle Ed, I imagine by the time I get back from the hospital, Andromeda is not going to be over Aunt Betty's body. Andromeda is probably going to be around with the other horses. What I'm assuming is my nephew murdered my wife and skedaddled
I
in a cab.
Yeah, and took big old horse-sized bites out of her?
Well,
No. No.
I don't know. I meant, okay, is it, but it kind of made it seem like her head was fully exposed. Like, I can see, because the nephew, like, the protagonist is a male, and he makes it very clear that Aunt Betty is the least favorite in the family. I could see that, oh, deserves this money. You're wasting it on this horse farm. Sledgehammer to the head. Call it a day.
So I disagree with you there because the protagonist very clearly says that Andromeda takes just a chomp out of her head, straight munching on that cranium. Says that her cranium is exposed. There's brain matter in Andromeda's teeth. So there's very clearly like horse bites out of her head, which, I mean, horses do have that level of, chomp to them. Andromeda's straight munching out of Aunt Betty's heads, Aunt Betty's head. Um, but no, I can't get behind the concept that you walked out to the stables with a handgun. Andromeda's locked in a stall, and you somehow lost. How do you do that? That's insane to me.
Well, that's why, the author did warn us that Aunt Betty was like good for nothing. And I mean, if she failed at that task, the author wasn't wrong. The protagonist was totally on the money that why are you giving Aunt Betty money? She can't even take down a caged animal. I mean, she needs all the help she could get.
I I would agree, and this is proof to my point that we could rag on this story all night long. But please, Cal, I would greatly appreciate your rating for this story so we could move on and hopefully go about our existence knowing that Andromeda is in this world.
I originally was gonna give this a 4 out of 10, but after talking with you, for the comedic factor, I'm gonna give it a 5. I think that's my lowest rating. It was a very poorly written story. When I read it by myself, it didn't make any sense. It was a bunch of filler and then a horse eating a person. But being able to establish this head canon with you and hearing your opinion on it, I'm giving it a 5 out of 10. Not because it was a good story, but because we were able to make something out of it.
I greatly appreciate that, and I'm actually going to take the exact opposite approach to this. I originally wrote down a 3.5 out of 10, but I think after establishing this headcanon and really, you know, figuring out what we liked, disliked, and the jokes about this story, and having to re-record over and over because these statements didn't make any sense to me, I'm gonna have to go a 3 out of 10, the lowest I've ever rated a story.
That is that is totally fair. I'm not saying this will be the worst story we read, because there is always that number one position of 1 out of 10. But as of right now, for a month and a half into this channel, it is, we can only go up. I'm excited for what the future brings us, but on that note, Cicada, it's time to barn the bar doors and call it for a night.
Good night, everybody. Sleep well.
Good night.